Principals oversee the day-to-day life of their schools, but just what that entails has shifted over the years. Many now report that instead of focusing on education and guiding the professional development of their staff, they're bogged down in administrative work. Joining us now on that and the impact that's having on students, Annalisa Varano. She is president of the Catholic Principals Council of Ontario and a principal with the Simcoe Muskoka Catholic District School Board, and we're glad you could spare some time for us at TVO tonight.
Thank you very much.
Just tell us, what are your main duties as a principal?
Well, as you know, I think historically principals were seen as the authoritative figure, a disciplinarian, somewhere that you went to when you were in trouble. And I think that that's evolved over time. And, you know, the teacher was seen historically too as that driver of success. But more and more, they're seeing principals as really impactful on student achievement and student success. And so we see the role, like we love to see the role as a way of really impacting change in schools. And so we are change leaders, we are servant leaders.
How long have you been doing it for?
I've been a principal, well, I started as a vice principal in 2006, and so I've been a principal for the last 9 years, since 2010.
Okay.
So.
How much of your job, I don't know if you can sort of give us a ratio, how much of your job is dealing with paperwork and staffing and all of that stuff that's probably less interesting, and how much of it is actually direct interaction with students?
Well, like again, the goal is always to interact with the students and to be out there in the halls and to be constantly communicating with them and to even working with staff on how to drive that instructional agenda. But unfortunately, that's right, the door is always open, and so we have to deal with the issues that come at hand on any particular day. And with that comes a lot of paperwork and long hours of trying to get everything completed so that you know, we can engage in some of those more important roles.
Because you got to be present, right? You got to be seen. The students have to see you doing your thing.
That's right.
And is that harder nowadays?
It's significantly harder to be visible. So to get out in the hallway, you know, I'm in a secondary school, to get out to the hallway, often times and right from that, you know, 10 or 15 things are going to come up while you're out there. And so then next thing you know, you're in your office. However, parents are walking into the office at all times. There's staff issues, human resources, budget responsibilities, allocation of resources, demands of people, you know, wanting things as the day goes on. And so we have to pay attention to those things as well.
How much good old-fashioned, I'm going to use an expression here that I know you don't do, but for the lack of, it's what's in my head. How much headbutting do you do of students, you know? Breaking up fights and just all that kind of stuff.
So quite a bit, you know, dealing with student issues is one of the major parts of the day-to-day of the job. I'm very thankful that I've always had a vice principal in the school I've been at, so it's also assisted me in some of that interaction. But it really is about building relationships, Steve, so I really believe that the more relationships, the better relationships that we build with the students, the better the behavior becomes in the school. It's about setting expectations for them, and my expectations have always been very high, and so I believe that, you know, to set the goal high, and students will achieve that. And so they once they get to know you, they understand what you expect of them, and the behavior starts to change.
I wonder how much more difficult it is as well, because, and I know from my own kids' examples, you know, it seemed like there's a new principal coming in every 3 years or something like that at the school. Is it tougher to try to do what you need to do when you're on the move as much as many of you are nowadays?
And so that's a great point, because you know, it's very important when you start off as a principal in a school to really take the time and understand historically what has gone on. And so once you get to understand that, which could take a year to really understand you know, just the culture of the school and the history, the parent community, the students, getting to know the students. And so once you're ready to start to really impact some change, then oftentimes you can be moved. So that does significantly impact your efforts, but also just, you know, things progressing in the school as well.
Let's talk about another thing that has really been on a lot of people's minds lately, and that is, I'll reference a 2018 report by People for Education, found that principals like you spending a large chunk of their time, maybe more than ever, on mental health issues. How does that play out in your daily work?
So yes, increasing amount of students and staff and families that are struggling with mental health issues. And so that, as a principal, is challenging for many reasons. I mean, we are in constant communication with community partners on the telephone all the time, making those connections, trying to find assistance for students that are in crisis. The stress and impact of the job is affecting teachers and educational assistants on the job, and so therefore they're going off on leaves. And so it inhibits us from putting the most qualified people in front of those students at that time. So lots of issues with just absences, and even in the morning, sometimes we'll get to work and 5 or 6 people may be off at any given time.
5 or 6 teachers?
Yeah.
You mean
that's
you would get a call? You'd get calls from maybe 5 teachers in one day or something?
Yeah, so
like that?
we every day is part of that job is getting to work quite early to check the absence report to make sure all the jobs have been filled. And in many cases, they have not been filled because there is a shortage that way too of having enough supply teachers or people that are qualified to be in those positions to come in. And oftentimes, we are left to do the supervision.
Well, tell me this. If you get a teacher coming to you and saying something like, this is just way, way tougher nowadays, and I think I'm going to crack, I got to get out of here. How do you react to that? What do you do?
Well, we try really hard to just support the teacher in whatever that they need. And I mean, if they're coming to us and they're having significant issues with dealing, we want to make sure that we're supporting them. We're supporting them with parents, and supporting them with their students as well, and just trying to find strategies and ways on how we can do that. And then, oftentimes that they decide that perhaps it is beneficial for them to take some time off, and so then we're in a position where we do need to fill that position as well.
Would you be the point person if a student is suffering from mental health issues?
Yes, so there is an intake process, so we do, because we do have board, like psychologist support and guidance counselors, but it's not enough. Like, we do need more supports from the community, so I am in constant contact with those community partners. And oftentimes we are suggesting those partners to our staff as well if we need to.
Let's talk class size. What advice? You've met the Minister of Education, right? The new Minister of Education?
Yes, I have, yes.
Did you talk to him about class size?
We certainly did, yes.
What was your advice to him on that?
So with increased class size becomes a reduction in staff in the building, so supervision for students in the building. It's also, we have to cut programming to adjust to those ratios. And so we talked about the formula. And so the formula that is now suggested at 22.5 doesn't necessarily filter down to the ground level that nicely. So oftentimes our class sizes are increased to 34, 35 students in some of our academic classes. I gave him some examples about how if I am running 4 or 5 math sections that are filled with over 35 students, at that point, it's not responsible to do that. So I'll open up a 6th section to take some pressure off those 5 sections. But at the expense,
then you need another teacher then.
I know I have to close another section because we're only given so many teachers, right? So
is this in the secondary panel? You get 35 students in a secondary class.
There has been many, cases now. I'm sure the numbers are going to come in this week to indicate, but I know that some of my colleagues are really struggling with increased class size, the ratios for that. So unfortunately, if you have to open up another section of those academic or math or mandatory classes, you have to close other sections, and a lot of times the electives get hit. And those are the courses that the kids really need.
For example?
For example, the automotive trade, the construction courses, the hospitality courses, the arts. So those are the ones that will unfortunately have to be reduced in order, because they're not necessarily mandatory courses. There is one mandatory arts course, but.
What's the advice you gave him as to, in your view, the best way out of that conundrum?
Well, the best way out of the conundrum is to leave and not reduce class size, basically. Is that an option? I don't know at this time, but I know that he's taken it under advisement. We had a really great conversation.
You mean not increase class size?
Not to, to leave it as is,
right.
not to increase it. We also talked about how the impact of staffing is. So right now, we cannot replace retired teachers because we are trying to get up to that 28 threshold. And so
28 students per class.
Correct. On average,
On
as an
average,
average.
across
That's
the
right.
board.
Across the board.
Right.
And so with that, for example, if your physics teacher retires, you cannot hire a new physics teacher. You can't post for a new position because we're not replacing the retirees at this point.
So what do?
So we try to utilize the staff that you have in the building to, and therefore, there may be some lack of specialization in that regard. So that has how it impacts students.
Are you going to
Because
have
you're not getting the right person in front of the student.
So is it theoretically possible you're going to have an English teacher teaching physics?
Well, yes, you know, try your hardest to find somebody that is, you know, perhaps in the math field or something closer to it than English, but yes, that could happen.
So in your view, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but in your view, the changes that the current government is bringing forward will have an adverse impact on students.
Yeah, like it's our responsibility to actualize the priorities of the government. That's our job. And that is what we plan to do. So, but as discerning people, as the specialists on the ground, we want to be able to provide some consultation on some of those changes so that it has a more satisfactory impact on students, less of an impact on students. Like we really feel that we know how it works on the ground, and so we are hopeful for those consultations to take place, so it have lesser of an impact.
In our last minute here, let me ask you about one more thing, which is, and this has got a lot of attention, maybe a disproportionate amount of attention, the cell phone ban.
Oh yes.
How does it work in your school? Do you intend to ban cell phones in the classrooms now?
So most schools, I mean, I can give you many examples of schools, already have some kind of policy in place that actually bans cell phone during the instructional time. And so a policy that I've had in place for many years is that it's at the discretion of the teacher. So if the teacher says off and away during instructional time, the cell phone's off and away. And I think, I don't actually think it's a bad thing to have it in the provincial policy, in the code of conduct. It does give schools leverage. I know that not all schools run the same way, and not all principals are the same either, and and how they would administer a policy that way. But having it in the provincial code of conduct, to me, is just an area of leverage for the principal, so that if they don't want the cell phones in the classroom, if that teacher doesn't feel it's useful, that they're not using it as a tool or as a resource in the class, then it's off and away.
They can say, sorry guys, my hands are tied, it's provincial edict, we got to do it.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does, again, it's up to the principal to enforce those and to get the buy-in from the staff to enforce those policies, but absolutely.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for some insight into how you do what you do. That's Annalisa Varano, President of the Catholic Principals Council, Ontario.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.